Have you ever found yourself looking at the world, at all the suffering, and just wondered, if there's a loving God, why does any of this happen? It's a question that has honestly kept people up at night for centuries. So in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into one of the biggest paradoxes out there, the paradox of free will, and see if we can make some sense of it.
Okay, so let's just jump right into the deep end. This is it. This is the big one, the central problem we're trying to solve. You have this idea of an all-good, all-powerful being. But then you have the reality of suffering and evil. And on the surface, that looks like a massive, undeniable contradiction. How can both be true?
So how do people usually try to square this circle? Well, the most common answer you'll hear is something called the free will defense. And really, it's an attempt to place all the responsibility for evil squarely on our shoulders, not God's.
At its heart, the idea is pretty straightforward. God gave us this incredible gift of free will. Now, if we take that gift and misuse it, if we choose to do evil, well, the fault lies with us, not the one who gave us the gift in the first place. You know, it's kind of like a parent giving a child a hammer. If the kid uses it to build a birdhouse, great. If they use it to break a window, is the parent really to blame for that choice?
But, this neat and tidy explanation, it comes at a pretty high price. It really starts to chip away at the idea of God's sovereignty, his total power over creation. It kind of begs the question, is God just watching from the sidelines? A spectator in history who is powerful enough to stop all the bad stuff but just chooses not to interfere with our choices?
And this defense, it's not exactly airtight. When you start to poke at it, you're left with some very tricky leftover problems that show some serious cracks in the whole argument.
First off, what about God being all-knowing? I mean, if God knows absolutely everything, then he must have known that creating beings with free will would inevitably lead to evil and immense suffering. So, why do it? Suddenly, that seems to put the responsibility right back on his shoulders, doesn't it?
And that leads to another really tough question about responsibility. Think about it. In literally any other context, we hold a creator accountable for their creation. An inventor, an artist, a company. So why would that principle suddenly not apply to the ultimate creator?
Now, the typical comeback here is that, well, free will was necessary. Without it, we'd just be a bunch of pre-programmed robots, incapable of real love. But there's a pretty sharp response to that. Necessity does not remove liability. Just because something was necessary to achieve a goal doesn't automatically get the creator off the hook for all the consequences.
And this is where the whole idea of free will starts to get a little fuzzy. We talk about it like it's this total, absolute freedom. But is that really what our lives look like? In the real world, our choices are heavily limited by things we have zero control over.
I mean, this example just says it all, doesn't it? Seriously, think about it. How much free will to choose a specific religion did someone born in the Congo 1,000 years ago truly have? Can we honestly sit here and say they had the same freedom of choice as someone born today into a different family in a completely different part of the world? Our circumstances dramatically shape and limit this so-called free will.
Okay, so if the free will defense is full of holes, what's the alternative? Let's swing the pendulum all the way to the other side of the theological spectrum, to a view that puts God's absolute power and total control above everything else.
This view is called predestination, and it argues that God's will is absolute, period. There's no random chance, no real human choice that can thwart his plan. He foreknew and predestined every single outcome from the beginning of time, which pretty much means our free will is, for all intents and purposes, an illusion.
But wow, this view raises a really troubling picture of God, doesn't it? It can paint a picture of a sort of divine tyrant, a being who is powerful enough to save everyone, but who deliberately, by his own sovereign choice, decides not to. You can see how that does some serious damage to the idea of a loving God.
So here we are, stuck in this paradox. It feels like an impossible choice between two extremes. On one side, you've got a God who is loving, but kind of weak and not really in control. And on the other, you have a God who is all-powerful and in total control, but who comes across as unloving, maybe even unjust. But what if this is a false choice, a false dilemma? What if there's a way to bring these two ideas together that doesn't sacrifice God's love for his power or his power for his love? Let's explore a potential third way.
This third way imagines a God who isn't defined by power versus love, but by power, love, and wisdom, all working together in perfect harmony. So a being who is powerful enough to save absolutely everyone, loving enough to actually want to save everyone, and crucially, wise enough to figure out how to do it in a way that is perfectly fair and just.
And you can immediately see the appeal of this, right? This is a God whose character is perfectly balanced and ultimately completely good. It's a vision that inspires people to follow out of genuine love and admiration, not because they're afraid of a tyrant or because they feel pity for a helpless bystander.
But hold on. If this view is so compelling, why isn't it more popular? Why do so many people have a hard time with it? Well, it seems the roadblocks have less to do with logic and theology and more to do with our own human psychology and tradition.
For one, for a lot of people, it just sounds too good to be true. Then there's a really tough personal one. Deep personal trauma can be a huge barrier. If you've been deeply hurt, the idea that your abuser could also be saved can be an impossible pill to swallow. And finally, for many, it's just what they've been taught. Their traditions have warned them against ever believing such an idea.
And that brings us right here to our final and maybe most provocative question. It completely flips the script. It challenges us to rethink the very limits we put on God. What if a God who saves everyone isn't too good to be true? What if that is simply who God is? What if our own limited ideas about power and love and justice have been the very things preventing us from seeing a much bigger, more beautiful, and ultimately more hopeful picture?